Hello and welcome to Shaka Extra Time. I am Paul Ndiho. Joining me on set live is Shaka Sali himself, aka the Kabale Kid. Hello, Shaka.
Hello, Paul.
How are you?
Hugely terrific, my friend.
Good, good. Good to see you again. Today we'll be talking about a lot of things, especially happening on the continent. But before we go there, a warm welcome to you, all our Facebook followers watching us live from all over the world. Shaka Extra Time is a place where you get to talk to Shaka himself. Shaka, right away, let's maybe start in Burundi. Interesting developments in Burundi. So many things have been happening. I can't even count what has happened in the last 2 days. There is so much happening in a sense that they're coming up with a referendum this week, and then I think it's on Thursday. So many things are at stake. Your thoughts, Shaka?
Well, it's very interesting that we're talking obviously about a referendum, but I wonder what is particularly significant or particularly unique about a referendum. I mean, a referendum, one would hope and think, is an opportunity through which citizens of a country get the opportunity to decide what they want. And we hope that that type of environment, that type of climate obtains in the Republic of Burundi, so that people on Thursday, they can decide whether to amend the constitution so that they can remove term limits, in which case, you know, an individual that occupies State House in Burundi, at least for the next 2 terms, doesn't really have to worry very much. And also, in this particular case, the question is fashioned in a manner that, for example, does not affect the incumbent president, Pierre Nkurunziza, who has actually been in power since 2005, I think, the last time I checked. And his term probably does not, in fact, end until 2020. And in this particular case, Burundians have an opportunity. They have a chance to think whether, in fact, an amendment is needed to remove term limits. And if you remove those term limits, you also accept the fact that you increase the term, which normally is 5 years, to 7 years. So what happens if, in fact, the yes vote wins? It means that incumbent President Pierre Nkurunziza will have an opportunity to run for the next 2 terms, which means if, in fact, the Burundians engage in a process that is deemed or seemed to be free, fair, credible, transparent, and verifiable, he can actually rule Burundi until 2034.
Interesting, interesting. Let's go. Our Facebook comments are buzzing. Let's go straight away to Facebook. Let's start in Monrovia, Liberia. What do you make of President Nkurunziza as a quest for another term? Obviously, he's trying to use the guise of going through a referendum, but he's technically looking at even it in a bigger sense, in a manner that he's already positioned himself to be in power until 2034.
He probably would have actually problems with you when you say that he's trying this or that in terms of the first person. From what I have heard from him, he actually says that it is up to the Burundian people, and in fact, his own party, the CNDD, FDD. These are the people, at least according to him, who feel that he is the type of person, in as far as the Burundian politics are concerned, who they really feel is uniquely qualified. Almost like somebody would say, is like a sort of political God's gift to Burundi, at least for the moment. They pretty much can't do without him. And so he pretty much, to use another phrase from another president in that region, he's basically succumbing to the pressure of his people.
Interesting. Let's go to a tweet from Joseph Slavic. I don't see what the problem is with the referendum in Burundi. It will be up to the people of Burundi who will vote and determine their future. What do you make of that?
Very legitimate. I mean, Joe does have a very legitimate point of view. The only problem with it is that you have to figure out whether, in fact, again, going back to how I started, whether, in fact, politically, you do have an environment, you do have conditions that allow people to express themselves freely. The question is, does that, in fact, environment, do those conditions obtain in Burundi? Sometimes you hear that, yes, those types of conditions obtain, but there are other, other sources which say, no, you really don't have that. Now, the question is, who are those people, institutions or groups, who are in fact going to carry out the issues of monitoring the election, observing the election? Because the last time I checked, I don't know whether it is true, but actually I read somewhere that the East African community, of which Burundi happens to be one of the 6 members, that is actually not going to send representatives to observe that exercise. If true, then there could probably be an issue. I don't know whether the African Union is going to go there. I don't know who else is going there. I don't know about the ability or the freedom with which the Burundian civil society will be in a position where they have the right and the freedom to observe the process on Thursday. So the jury is still out. Is that referendum, in fact, going to be a referendum? Or is it going to be a process that is controlled by the government?
Speaking of a process that is controlled by the government, let's go to another comment here from Amos Sachisisi. He says, good luck on Burundi's referendum. We are tired of Western nations who come to Africa in the name of human rights while they know nothing about the people's rights. Your thoughts?
Well, I think he has a point. I think I'm about to complete a book which is called basically The Scramble for Africa. It is written by a former student at Oxford University, a man who happens to, in fact, belong to what you would say the British elite, Thomas Pakenham. And when you look at how the Europeans went to Africa and what they did or did not do, sometimes you find that that kind of gentleman probably has a point. But when you think about the fact that we no longer have, at least Europeans really, in terms of governing, we do have people who we are related by blood and all that kind of stuff. The question is, how are they in fact doing? Are they in fact doing the business of governing, bearing in mind that they're actually doing this for people? Or are they in fact doing it for themselves, frankly, as individuals? I sometimes say that are they in fact patriotic to their nations? Or are they in fact patriotic to their stomachs? The stomachs of their families, their friends, but not society. That's the issue we should be looking at, because let's face it, Africa is not a poor continent. On the contrary, some sources suggest that Africa may in fact be the home of more than 60% of some of the most important resources that the world in fact depends on. And yet, Paul, the last time I checked, the people of Africa are probably the poorest on this planet Earth.
Shaka, maybe let's try to examine this whole referendum thing, term limit thing, maybe, and put it into context. Let's look at some examples. For example, in 2005, Yoweri Museveni of Uganda managed to hash through a constitutional amendment. It went through. He abolished term limits. Now, as we speak, he has abolished the age limit. He's set to run again in 2021. You have Paul Biya in Cameroon. He has succeeded in doing that in 2008. You have Djibouti's Ismail Omar, who tried the same thing in 2008. Paul Kagame in 2015. Denis Sassou Nguesso in 2015. The list goes on and on and on. What's in it for these guys? Why is every leader interested in changing their constitutions to allow them stay longer, or to even remove the age limits as you spoke about earlier?
Very interestingly, Paul, is that you can probably not find a single person that you mentioned admitting why he thinks that there's no need really for term limits. What they say, all of them almost as a rule, they basically tell you they are quote-unquote political hostages. They are political hostages of their political parties, if in fact they do have parties, because some people say that in fact they don't have parties because they are actually parties. Just like, you know, at one time I think you heard about the one time very powerful king of France, Louis VIII or something, who used to say that I am the state and the state is me. And so their supporters sincerely say that those types of countries cannot do with those particular individuals because, again, those particular individuals happen to be very uniquely gifted. And it's quite possible that some of them, in fact, are. But the problem is, wait a minute, what if, in fact, those people, God forbid, what if somebody dies? Does it mean, in fact, that person has actually to die with that particular country? It happened, in fact, for some time in a country called Ivory Coast, Côte d'Ivoire, where a founding president, a man called Houphouët-Boigny, was pretty much like a king, really, a presidential monarch. Until he died, when he died, he pretty much almost like died with Ivory Coast. Because after that, guess what? It triggered civil war that lasted for a very, very long time. Look at a country called Somalia, for example. You had Siad Barre. Siad Barre was also looked at, as far as his supporters are concerned, as an individual who was uniquely gifted. He didn't stay in power really as long, even more longer than these people, because he was in power, I think, for about 21 years. But after that, my brother, Somalia has never been the same. So there is a case where supporters of these individuals who end up being presidential monarchs, you know, they present the case and they say it is very necessary because, again, these individuals are very uniquely qualified to play that role. But when you look at it very, very closely, you'll find that actually some of these people who are supporters, it is not so much that they are supporting these particular individuals. They are actually supporting themselves. Because for as long as this particular individual is in the State House, is in charge of distributing or deciding who gets what and who doesn't in terms of resources, they are the people who happen to be in the first lane. And so it's about them. They are patriots to their stomachs. And because they are, they don't see why they should get out of power. But others will tell you that any society needs to renew itself. You need one generation to, at some point, you know, hand over the baton to a younger generation so that the younger generation can also figure out how to organize that society in terms of development. So I think that this has almost become like a political disease, but it's not a good disease really, in the sense that it really is not to the benefit of the vast majority of the African people. Rather, it is to the benefit, some will argue, and probably a lot of them actually will argue, to these individuals who happen to be power hungry, who happen to be very greedy, very selfish, to the extent that they think they have to run a country where there is a monologue, not a dialogue. Because if there was a dialogue, they would know that it is time, you know, to kind of like, come on, man. You know, step aside, let someone else come back and, you know, take society forward.
You are watching Shaka Extra Time, a show that comes to you live from here in Washington every Tuesday. Back to you, Shaka. There is a Facebook comment here from Lomé. He says, Africa generally has just accepted that they have failed in both democracy and politics. Let them embark on kingdoms rather than pretending to have these periodic elections. Your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, I think this particular individual, I don't know who he is addressing that comment or that question to, because it is not really all Africans or the majority of the Africans that determine how these societies run. So
but their leaders have failed them.
Well, precisely because probably these are not their leaders. These just happen to look like them. They happen to probably know where some of these individuals were born, went to school, and where they trained and what have you, whether they were in the military and what have you. But that is the only thing that they have in common with a lot of these other people whom these individuals claim to lead. These are not leaders, Paul. These are rulers, just like colonial rulers, really. The only difference is that colonialism had rulers who were called governors, who were white people. They were European people. In this particular case, you have an indigenous type of rulers who happen to be indigenous. The question is, do they in fact have really a sense, do they know what they are really up to? Perhaps they do. And if they do, what is it really? Do they have the interests of the vast majority of their own people, frankly, at heart? Do they in fact put their own country above and beyond the individual greedy, selfish interests? I think if you look at most of them, the answer probably will be no, they don't. So these really are people, for the most part, they actually seize power. They are not chosen. They are not elected. They seize power with AK-47 in the name of being freedom fighters, in the name of being liberators. But when it comes to the business of governing, my friend, some of them in fact start saying, you know what? Where were you when I was going to the bush to try and liberate you? I have liberated you, and therefore I have a sense of entitlement. I killed my beast. This is my beast. And so when I start cutting my beast and what have you, you need a visa in order for you at least to have a piece of the action.
Shaka, you seem to be suggesting that if I was a young person, highly educated, I have ambition to run for maybe political office at some point, I have no future in Africa or in any country that some of these countries that we've been talking about, because there seem to be, you hit a wall when you start aspiring for these bigger positions because of these guys who are there. They don't want to leave. They don't want to create room for us to get in. So what kind of advice would you give to young people who are watching maybe this program?
Well, first of all, I will tell you that Africa is a continent. It is not a country. That continent has 54 countries, which are member countries of the African Union, plus Western Sahara, which is still struggling to disengage itself from Morocco, so that in fact it can also become a country. So as at present, you have 54 member countries in a sense that belong to Africa. Out of those 55 countries, I will be very honest with you that if you are a young man, you better hope that you come from South Africa, that you probably come from Mauritius, that you probably come from Seychelles, that you come from Botswana, that you come from Namibia, you come from a place like Ghana, you come from a place like, at least now we could even say a place like Liberia, that you come from Sierra Leone, that you come from Benin, and to some degree you come from Nigeria.
Not East Africa.
I don't know, maybe to a certain degree, a very lesser degree in East Africa, that you probably come from Kenya. But even if you come from Kenya, you know, short of course of the golden political handshake between Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta and Raila Amolo Odinga, you also may have problems there. But at least for them, they have reached a point where they may actually be able to figure out a way of saying, yes, we do not really love one another, but we are politically condemned to living together. And therefore, we should look for a certain way where we can begin to realize that whether we like it or not, we are actually neighbors. And because we are neighbors, what is expected of us is essentially to hold each other's back. If you come from Northern Africa, you also have a problem. You are in Egypt, you have to be a Pharaoh, my friend. You know what happened in Egypt about 5 years ago.
You can take over, you can become a Sisi.
Yes, you can become a Sisi because he happens to inherit that from the first man who actually did it back in 1952, Colonel Gamal Abdel Nasser. He was a benevolent dictator. He was a good man. He was a man who obviously pretty much, you know, was interested in African unity and what have you, and helped a lot of liberation struggles. And, by the way, when people like Patrice Emery Lumumba were killed in the Congo, he basically, in a sense, adopted the children of Patrice Lumumba. They grew up in Egypt. When Kwame Nkrumah, the Osajefo, the Redeemer, was overthrown in Ghana, he also gave a hand to the Kwame Nkrumah family, even though, of course, Kwame Nkrumah's wife was actually Egyptian. In fact, my friend Gamal, you know, Gamal Goke Nkrumah, is a legitimate, respected editor of the English edition of Al-Haram in Cairo. And it was because of Gamal Abdel Nasser. I don't know really whether RCC follows into that league. He probably doesn't, because let's face it, the man was promoted to a field marshal. You remember that? Gamal Abdel Nasser seized the power as a colonel and remained a colonel until his death back in 1970. So there are other countries, by the way, if you're a young African person, where you can go, like Malawi, I think. You can go. And to a certain degree, I think Tanzania, you know, it may be going through some kind of turmoil and what have you, but it's also a place that probably can accommodate you. But you have a problem to be in Ethiopia, except that it looks like there could actually very well be a light at the end of the tunnel politically in Ethiopia right now, under the new Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. You probably wouldn't have a very good future in Eritrea. You probably wouldn't have a good future in South Sudan, nor would you, in fact, have a good future in Khartoum. You wouldn't have a good future probably in Uganda, in Rwanda. You probably wouldn't also have a good future in the DRC, but then again we could say the jury is out, because they are supposed to be having elections which have been delayed since 2016 on December 23rd later this year. So there are a lot of places. Angola seems also to be changing a bit, but we have probably to be a bit patient. So there are not so many places, sincerely, if you are a young, educated, politically ambitious type of individual.
Let's switch the subject. Let's go to Uganda. There's been this talk about the United Nations shifting one of its bases from Uganda to Kenya. There's a lot of controversy surrounding it, and I think a lot of Ugandans are going to lose jobs as a result of this. What do you read into this? Is the United Nations now getting to terms with it? Are they realizing that the guy in Uganda, the president in Uganda, and his people have been taking advantage of the system?
Not really. I don't think it is that. I think it is essentially some kind of housekeeping business at the United Nations. they decided that they used to have so many different types of centers really around the world. And Uganda, as we talk, has actually been almost the center in terms of administration and logistics and in some of that kind of stuff, in terms of African peacekeeping, you know, forces and all that kind of stuff. But people forget that Kenya, for example, has the third largest, I think, UN complex after Geneva in Switzerland and after New York in the United States. You get Kenya. I know that there's a very large center also in Germany, in Bonn and what have you, but not like Kenya. And so Kenya, also in terms of infrastructure, you're talking about, for example, you remember you were telling me about your journey from Mombasa to Kenya, to Nairobi, on this great new Chinese-built railway, you know, railway and stuff like that. So they have that, for example, advantage of having that type of infrastructure that enables the UN, for example, to carry its goods really from Mombasa to Nairobi. And guess what? They also have, at least in terms of their argument, Kenya Airways. And the Kenya Airways is going to begin flights this year, direct flights from Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, near Embakasi there, to JFK. And where is the headquarters of the UN? In New York.
In New York, yeah.
The Big Apple. And let's face it, they also have a lot of other things going for them in terms of at least predictability, in terms of a little bit of social, political kind of like semblance of stability.
Yeah. Shaka, we have time for maybe one question. Let's go to Nigeria. Nigeria is grappling with a lot of insecurity. You have Boko Haram on one end, kidnapping people. As of today, some people were kidnapped. Then you also have this, maybe I can tie it to a comment from Birunji Moses, who writes that, Dear Kabaleki, talk to us about the Nigerian Fulani armed herdsmen continuing to kill people, yet the government has closed the one eye on this matter.
You know, I don't really know whether the government has closed one eye on that matter, because I've actually been following that issue. And I also remember that Nigerian President Major General Muhammadu Buhari, retired but not tired, also found some time to talk about that issue when he last came here. You do have a problem, obviously, between a conflict between the whole of people who cultivate, they need grass and water, and those people who are pastoralists also need their cows to get unfettered access to water. So it is a problem, but the government says it is trying to solve it. And so this guy may have an opinion and is entitled to it, but does he, in fact, is he entitled to his own sets of facts? Very
quickly, what are you talking about tomorrow?
Burundi, looking at the upcoming Burundi referendum.
Well, on that note, thank you so much for being a great guest. I look forward to hosting you on another edition of Shaka Extra Time. Until then, so long from Washington. And to all our viewers, thank you so much. Keep those comments coming, and we look forward to seeing you again next week. For now, bye.